The first thing I noticed about the verification chamber was the smell. Every military installation I had ever passed through, 43 of them, across 9 systems, in 19 years of service, smelled the same way. Recycled air, machine oil, the particular metallic undertone of a life support grid running at 60% capacity to save on fuel costs. The verification chamber beneath Conclave Station Marath Vor smelled like none of that. It smelled like cold. Not the cold of a refrigeration unit or a vacuum seal, but the cold of something ancient and very precise. The cold of stone that has never been warm, of a place built to measure things and nothing else. I had been standing in the intake queue for 2 hours and 40 minutes. There were 112 of us on the escort rotation for the Marath Vor Diplomatic Summit. Soldiers, liaisons, adjutants, 2 military physicians, and a handful of communications specialists who had the good sense to look bored rather than impressed. The dignitaries themselves, 12 heads of state, 9 planetary governors, 3 trade federation chairs, and Empress Varan Solathi of the Solathi Dominion, had their own intake process on the upper level. We were the support staff. We went through the basement. The queue moved with the particular cadence of bureaucratic processes that are not slow but are also not fast. They are simply thorough, which is its own kind of pace, one that does not respond to impatience and does not apologize for it either. I had stood in enough queues to have made a kind of peace with them. You used the time. You thought about things that needed thinking about. You observed the room. The other soldiers in the queue were doing what soldiers do in queues. The ones who had done it before were conserving energy, standing loosely, not talking, letting their awareness idle at a level just above automatic. The ones who had not done it before were doing one of 2 things. Some were looking around with the careful interest of people who have decided that looking interested is more dignified than looking bored, and some were standing the way people stand when they are trying to look like they are not nervous and are not entirely succeeding. You could sort them this way without trying. You sorted everything this way after a while. It became automatic, a kind of reading that runs beneath the level of conscious attention, the way certain sounds run beneath the level of hearing, present, registered, processed, without any particular awareness of having processed them. Corporal Enshi, 4 places ahead of me in the queue, had gone through the chamber and out the far door 50 minutes before I reached the front of the line. She was the last familiar face I saw before I stepped into the circle. She had given me a nod as she passed through, the small nod of someone acknowledging a shared situation without making it into something more than it was, and I had returned it. And then she was through the door, and I was looking at the backs of 3 strangers and the slowly diminishing distance between me and the entry to the circle. The room was worth observing. The verification chamber was oval in its floor plan, which was unusual. Most security intake facilities were rectangular, because rectangles made the most efficient use of space, and security intake facilities were, in my experience, operated by people who thought about efficiency before they thought about anything else. The oval suggested something older, something built before efficiency became the primary concern, or built by someone for whom efficiency was not the first question. The walls were pale composite, but behind them, if you looked at the seams, you could see darker material, stone, I thought, actual cut stone, which meant the station had been built around an older structure, or the chamber itself had been transported whole from somewhere else. Either way, it was not young. The lighting was blue. Not aggressively blue, not the hard artificial blue of a medical bay under full operating illumination, but a deep, sustained blue, the color that water becomes at depth. It made everyone in the room look slightly colder than they were, which seemed appropriate for a chamber designed to assess you rather than welcome you. The verification chamber processed us 4 at a time. Each pass took roughly 40 seconds. Stand in the circle, look at the blue light, hold still, step out. Your biometric record was logged into the summit's security matrix. Your clearance code was printed on a strip of pale film and handed to you by a technician who did not make eye contact, and you moved through the far door into the holding corridor. The system had been doing this for 6 hours. By the time I reached the front of the line, it had done it 109 times without incident. I knew this because I had been watching. 2 hours and 40 minutes in a queue gives you time to understand the system you are waiting to enter. I had counted the cycles. I had timed them. I had noted the moment, approximately 90 minutes in, when the senior technician behind the main console stretched her neck to one side and then the other, which told me she had been sitting for too long and was managing it. I had noted the point at which the second technician, stationed at the side panel, responsible for the print function, began automatically reaching for the clearance strip before the cycle completed, which told me he had processed enough of us to have internalized the rhythm. I had noted the supervisor, visible through the side door during the one moment it stood open, a chair, a desk, a screen showing what I assumed was a monitoring feed. He checked it every 12 minutes, regular as a man who has done this many times before and has arranged his attention accordingly. When you stand in a queue for 2 hours and 40 minutes observing a system, you know before you enter it exactly what the system expects from you. Stand in the circle, look at the blue light, hold still, step out. 40 seconds. The 3 soldiers ahead of me went through without incident. I stepped into the circle. The circle was exactly wide enough to stand in with your arms at your sides, which was where I put them. The floor was pale composite, slightly textured for grip. The scanner array was a ring of 8 panels mounted at shoulder height, angled slightly inward, each one emitting that deep blue light. There was a low hum. I stopped hearing it inside 15 seconds, which was either the effect of acclimatization or the effect of the kind of attention I was paying to other things. I looked at the technician behind the processing console, the senior one, the one who had been stretching her neck at 90 minutes. She was Valith, long-limbed, gray-skinned, with the flat reflective eyes characteristic of species that evolved in low-light environments. She had been doing this all day, and it showed in the set of her shoulders and the economy of her movements. Everything reduced to its minimum, the way a body economizes when it has been asked to perform the same task repeatedly for hours and has quietly optimized itself. She was not looking at me. She was watching her console, waiting for the 40-second cycle to complete. The hum continued. I watched her eyes. She was not watching the main readout, that was automated, it populated its own panel. She was watching the secondary display, the one that showed the processing bar. In 40 seconds the bar completed, the primary display populated with your biometric summary, the clearance strip printed, cycle done. That was the sequence, unvaried across 109 repetitions. I had memorized it the way I memorized sequences that mattered. Not by trying to remember them, but by watching them long enough that they became familiar, the way roads become familiar, the way the sound of a particular engine becomes familiar, not memorized but recognized. At 40 seconds, the bar did not complete. The technician's gaze sharpened. Not alarm, adjustment. The recalibration of a person who has been doing something automatic and suddenly finds that it isn't automatic anymore. A paused cycle was probably a calibration lag, a data collision, a temporary thing. She keyed something on the console. The bar resumed, then slowed, then stopped at what I estimated was roughly 70%. I stayed where I was. Hold position, she said. Her standard was precise, accent neutral, the dialect of someone who had learned the language from a text rather than from people. There is a processing delay. It will resolve. I'm not going anywhere, I said. She looked at me then, for the first time since I had stepped into the circle. It was a brief look, the kind you give something that has made an unexpected sound, and it carried a quality of reassessment that I recognized from superior officers when something in their estimate of you has been quietly revised. Then she looked back at her console. The bar did not resolve. After another 30 seconds I was counting, she reached under the console and pressed something I could not see. A soft chime sounded, 2 tones ascending. That was a supervisor call. I knew it because it was the same 2-tone sequence used in every military processing facility I had ever been in, regardless of species, regardless of jurisdiction. Some designs were universal not because anyone had agreed on them, but because they were simply the right shape for the problem. The supervisor arrived from the side door. He was also Valith, but older, darker gray skin, the kind that comes with age, and a pair of optical enhancement rigs worn over his eyes like a second set of lenses. He looked at the console display for perhaps 4 seconds. Then he looked at me with an expression that had the layered quality of a man running multiple assessments simultaneously and not yet settled on any of them. "Are you experiencing any physical distress?" he asked. "No," I said. "Have you consumed any compounds in the last 72 hours that were not approved under the Summit Medical Protocol?" "No." "Any exposure to anomalous radiation sources, residual field equipment from active combat zones, scanner interference devices, anything of that nature?" I thought of the 3 weeks I had spent on Kethavar Station before this assignment, standing watch on a processing bay where they were decommissioning old pulsar weapons. The radiation shielding had been rated adequate. Adequate was a word that covered a lot of ground when the person using it was trying to meet a procurement budget. "There may have been some residual exposure from decommissioning work," I said. 3 weeks ago, pulsar old generation. The shielding was standard." He looked at the console again. He had the look of a man revising his hypothesis in real time, discarding one explanation and reaching for the next. "I am going to run the scan again from the beginning," he said. "All right," I said. He reset the cycle manually. The panels dimmed, then brightened. The hum dropped in pitch and rose again. The bar began from 0. The second technician had stopped reaching automatically for the clearance strip. He was watching the processing bar with the focused attention of someone who has been reminded that not all cycles complete on schedule, and is now taking the completion less for granted. I watched the bar cross 30%, 40, 50. At 62% it slowed, and I felt not heard, felt a change in the quality of the hum. A deepening, as though the system had found something it needed to examine more carefully and had reduced its own pace to do it. The bar stopped at 62%. The supervisor stood very still with both hands flat on the console surface, looking at the readout. From where I stood, I could see its reflection in his optical rigs, but I could not read the numbers. I could read his face. The expression on it had moved past the place that was adjacent to suspicion and concern, and arrived somewhere I could not name precisely, not fear, not excitement, but something that might become either one if given sufficient time to develop. He looked at me. "Sergeant," he said. He had not used my rank before. He had my clearance file submitted with the roster, but he had not used the rank. "I need to ask you to remain in the processing circle. I am going to make a call." "Take your time," I said. He walked to the far corner of the chamber and spoke quietly into a handheld communicator. The senior technician was watching me now with the careful, neutral attention of someone who has been given an implicit instruction to watch something without wanting to be seen doing it. The second technician had turned his chair to face the processing circle, given up all pretense of the clearance strip function, and was simply looking at me with open curiosity. I stood in the circle. I had spent 19 years in the service, getting good at standing still. People thought soldiers were trained primarily to move, to advance, to retreat, to hit and clear and hold position. And they were. But the deeper training, the thing that separated the ones who lasted from the ones who didn't, was the training to be still. Still under fire. Still in the presence of things that wanted you to move. Still in rooms like this one, where the air was cold and a blue light was pointing at you, and a man in the corner was saying words you couldn't hear. Being still is not the same as being empty. You notice things. You inventory. You maintain a running assessment of what you know, what you don't know, what you can reasonably infer, and what remains outside the boundary of inference and should be left there until more information arrives. You do not fill the empty spaces with fabrication. You leave them empty and you wait. After 4 minutes, the side door opened again. 3 people came through it. The first 2 were court officials. I could tell by their attire. The Solathi ceremonial vest in silver gray with the border embroidery that marked diplomatic grade. They moved into the chamber with the controlled urgency of people who have received news that requires them to be somewhere quickly and who are exercising discipline over the urge to arrive at a run. The third person through the door was not an official. The third person was Empress Solathi. I had seen her at the arrival ceremony 3 days before, the way you see a head of state from a distance, a figure in formal court dress, surrounded by attendants, moving through a space that reorganized itself around her as she passed through it. I had processed that image the way soldiers process images of VIPs, noted height, noted bearing, noted the quality of the protective formation around her, filed it, moved on. She was not relevant to my assignment. My assignment was the perimeter. She was relevant now. She entered the chamber with the same quality of movement I had observed at the arrival, not hurried, not slow, but purposeful in a way that suggested she had decided where she was going before she started moving and had seen no reason to revise the decision. She was taller than I had registered from a distance. Silver skin, the Solathi moderate tier that I had learned in the pre-summit briefing, was characteristic of the ruling family, not the near-human pale silver of the outer colonies, but a true silver, the color of old mirrors, with a very faint luminescence at the temple lines that was bioluminescent and not cosmetic. A genetic marker specific to the Solathi dynasty, the briefing had said. Her hair was black, worn in a formal court braid that pulled it severely from her face. Her eyes were gold, not amber, not yellow, but gold, the deep unoxidized kind, with vertical pupils that were almost fully dilated in the chamber's low blue light. She stopped at the edge of the processing circle. She looked at the console display. She looked at the supervisor, who had come back from his corner and was standing to one side with his hands clasped in front of him in the posture of a person delivering unwelcome information. She looked at me. "Run it again," she said. She said it in standard, which surprised me slightly. Her accent was different from the technicians, not text learned, but shaped by a language with different vowel positions, so that certain sounds came out slightly elongated, as though they had traveled further than standard sounds usually travel before they reach the air. "Your Imperial Grace," the supervisor said, with the careful precision of a man invoking protocol because he does not know what else to invoke. The procedure in the event of an anomalous biometric result is to. "I am aware of the procedure," she said. "I am asking you to run it again." The supervisor looked at me. I don't know what he was looking for. I gave him nothing but attention, which was the thing I had trained myself to give in situations where I did not know what else was appropriate. He turned back to the console and reset the cycle. The chamber went quiet in a different way now. When there had been only the technicians and the supervisor, the quiet had been procedural, the quiet of a room full of equipment doing its work. Now there were 7 people in the chamber and none of them were speaking, and the quiet had a different density. It had the density of sustained attention. 6 of us were watching the processing bar, and one of us, the Empress, was watching me. I knew she was watching me because I could see her in my peripheral vision, and I had not been trained to ignore things in my peripheral vision. I had been trained to assess them without looking at them directly, which is a different skill. The skill of being fully aware of a thing without making your awareness obvious, without giving the thing the power of your direct gaze. She was very still, stiller than someone who is merely observing a technical process, still the way I was still with intention. with the particular quality of a person who has decided to wait and has made a complete and unambiguous commitment to that decision. The bar crossed 50%, 60. At 62 it slowed, and I heard this time, actually heard it, not just felt it, the change in the hums register. Lower, sustained, intimate, the sound of a system running a calculation that matters. The panels brightened fractionally. The blue light gained something in its center frequency that I had not registered before. Not visible. The body registers it before the eyes name it. The bar stopped at 62. No one spoke. After a moment, the display did something I had not seen it do before. The processing bar cleared. Not completed, cleared, reset to 0, and began again from scratch, faster this time, as though the system had made a decision about what it was looking for and was now running a second, targeted analysis on the data it had already collected. The bar ran to 100% in approximately 8 seconds. The display populated. I could not read it from the center of the circle. The display was angled toward the console operator's position, but I could see the supervisor's face, and on the other side of the console, the face of the nearer court official. The supervisor's face did the thing faces do when they receive information the brain cannot immediately process. A brief emptying, a suspension of all organized expression, before the processing catches up and produces something legible. The court official sat down. There was no chair behind him. He sat down anyway, on the floor, with the abrupt lack of grace of a person whose legs have made an independent decision. The second court official said something in Solathi that I did not speak, but that I recognized, from the pre-summit cultural briefing, as a word reserved for specific ritual contexts. I could not remember which contexts. I remembered that the briefing officer had mentioned it with the particular emphasis of someone relaying information they find genuinely interesting, which usually meant it was either very old or very loaded, and often both. The Empress had not moved. She was looking at me with those gold eyes, the vertical pupils wider now, the bioluminescent lines at her temples fractionally brighter, and the look on her face was not the look of someone who does not know the answer. It was the look of someone who is deciding how much of the answer to give, and to whom, and in what order. "What does it say?" I asked. Not because I was alarmed. I was not alarmed. I asked because the alternative was to stand in the circle while everyone in the room processed something that apparently concerned me directly. And that seemed like a poor use of everyone's time, including mine. The supervisor looked at me. Then he looked at the Empress, checking whether he was permitted to answer. She said one word in Solathi, short, 2 syllables, and stressed. "It says," the supervisor said, translating not just language but weight, "that you carry a complete and unbroken Solathi dynasty marker." I looked at him. "I am not Solathi," I said. "No," he agreed. He looked at the display again, the way you look at something you keep expecting to change. "You are not. The system is reading a dormant genetic sequence, not active, not expressed in your phenotype, entirely recessive, that matches the Solathi imperial lineage at a rate of 94.7%. For reference, a confirmed first-degree Solathi blood relative tests at between 91 and 96%. "That's a wide range," I said. "It is," he said. "You are within it." The court official who had sat down on the floor was helped up by the senior technician. He stood against the wall and stared at the display with the expression of a man who has been told something is impossible and is waiting for the universe to correct itself. "How does a human carry a Solathi dynasty marker?" I asked. It was a reasonable question. The pre-summit briefing had covered Solathi genetic heritage in some depth. Understanding a head of state's lineage structure was considered relevant to diplomatic protocol. The Solathi were, according to the briefing, among the most genetically isolated of the long-form species. Their dynasty markers did not hybridize. They did not transfer. They were, the briefing officer had said with unusual emphasis, a closed loop. A dynasty marker that expressed only in direct biological succession, untransferable by any known mechanism, incapable of appearing in a species with no documented genetic contact with the Solathi line. "I don't know," the supervisor said. He looked at the Empress as he said it. She had not answered my question. She had not spoken since the one word of permission. She was looking at me, and the look on her face was the look of someone who is deciding, not someone who does not know. "Run it a third time," she said. "Your Imperial Grace," the second court official said. He had found his footing again, literally and otherwise. His voice had the recovered quality of someone who has administered a brief and efficient talking to himself. "The result has been produced twice. A second run was already outside standard protocol. If the result is consistent across 3 iterations, then under Article 14 of the Solathi Dynastic Code." "I know what Article 14 says," the Empress said. A pause. "Then you understand that a third consistent result would constitute." "I know what it would constitute," she said. "Run it a third time." He closed his mouth. The supervisor reset the cycle. "I want to be careful about what I did and did not feel, because I know how this story sounds from the outside, and I know how it can be misunderstood. I had been standing in a scanner circle for roughly 25 minutes. I had been told that I carried a genetic marker that, according to the briefing, was a closed loop, a thing that did not appear where I was standing with it. I was watching a room full of people experience varying degrees of structural difficulty with a piece of information, while the Empress of the Solathi Dominion stood 4 feet away from me and did not look away. What I felt was not excitement, not fear. Not the cold thrill of recognition that people describe when something important happens to them, as though importance arrives with a temperature. What I felt was the same thing I felt in the field when a situation moved outside the parameters I had prepared for, a sharpening, an inventory, a quiet internal check. What do I actually know? What is confirmed? What is inference and what is speculation dressed as inference? What is the next thing I need to do? What I actually knew was this: a machine had produced 2 results. A third result was about to be produced. I was not going to acquire any new information by performing distress about the first 2 results. I was standing in the circle. I would continue to stand in the circle. When the third result was produced, I would respond to it with whatever it warranted. R moved, 50%, 60, 62. It did not slow at 62. The system had already decided what it was looking for. The bar moved through 62 and 65 and 70 without hesitation, steady and clinical and unhurried, and I watched it cross 80% and 90, and I was aware, without looking at her, that the Empress had taken 1 step closer to the edge of the console, not to see the readout. She could not see it from that angle, but because she was listening. Listening to the quality of the hum, the way I had learned to listen to the quality of everything, for the information underneath the information. 100%. The display populated. The supervisor looked at it for a long time, long enough that the second court official stepped forward and looked at it too, and then stopped moving entirely. 94.9, the supervisor said. He said it quietly, not because he was trying to be quiet. He said it the way you say something when the thing you are saying has changed the size of the room, and you have not yet adjusted your voice to the new dimensions. 94.9%, the court official repeated. He said it quietly for a different reason. When you say something aloud in a room, you make it real in a way it was not quite real when it was only on a display screen. He was making it real. He could not stop himself from making it real. The chamber was silent. I want to tell you about the silence. Not because I have not encountered silences before, not because this one requires decoration, but because it was genuinely unlike the silences I had occupied in 19 years of field work, and the difference is worth noting. Military silence is purposeful. It is the silence between one thing and the next, the held breath before the order, the space in which everyone is waiting for the same person to speak and knows it will be soon. It has a direction. It points somewhere. The silence in the verification chamber was not pointing. It had come apart at its pointing end and was simply present, occupying the room, filling the blue-lit space between all of us, without destination or direction. Even the hum of the scanner array had stepped back. The whole room was waiting, not for the next thing but for itself, for the fact of what had just happened to settle into the shape of something that could be lived in. The senior technician was the first to move. She sat down in her chair slowly, with the deliberate care of a person who has decided that sitting down is the most honest response to the situation. The first court official, the one who had sat on the floor, was watching me now with an expression I recognized. I had seen it on soldiers who had survived something they had not expected to survive. Not relief exactly, not gratitude. The specific, quiet look of a person who is revising their understanding of what is possible and finding that the revision is not unwelcome, only large. The supervisor closed the readout. Not hit it, closed it, the way you close a completed record. He looked at the Empress. She was still looking at me. "Sergeant Marath," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Are you aware of your family history past 3 generations?" I thought about the question for a moment, not stalling, but genuinely considering whether it meant what it appeared to mean on its surface, or whether it meant something adjacent. "My family history," I said, "goes back to my grandparents. My grandmother on my father's side was adopted. The record before that is incomplete." "Incomplete," she said. "Lost," I said. "There was a colony collapse on Darren's world roughly 80 years ago. A lot of records went with it." "Darren's world," she said. She said it the way you repeat something you have been waiting a long time to hear confirmed. Not surprise, that was the wrong word for it. Recognition. The expression that a face makes when it has been holding a question for a long time and the question has just been answered. Not the expression of something new arriving, but of something old finally settling into its right position. The supervisor said something in Solathi, quickly, to the second court official. The official responded in the same language, equally quickly, and they both looked at the Empress. She did not look at them. "Your Imperial Grace," the court official said carefully, in Standard, "if Darren's world is the point of origin." "It is consistent," she said. "Yes." "Then the Article 14 provisions would apply," she said. "Yes." A pause. He considered. There was a quality to the pause of a man who knows the next question is important and is choosing his words with care. "Do you require time to?" "No," she said. She was still looking at me. I want to tell you what was in her face. I am not a man who concerns himself deeply with what is in people's faces. I watch faces for threat and intention, not content. But she was looking at me and I was looking at her, and what was in her face was not any of the things I had been trained to watch for. What was in her face was the particular expression of someone who has been carrying a weight for a very long time, alone, without anyone to share the carrying, and has just discovered that the weight is not, in fact, uncarryable, that someone else has been carrying the other side of it without knowing, for just as long. "May I ask," I said, "what Article 14 provides for?" The silence that followed was brief. The court official weighed whether to answer. The supervisor was studying the now dark display panel, as though it might spontaneously revise its output. The Empress answered. "It provides," she said, "that in the event of a confirmed dynasty marker match in a living candidate of any species, provided the match percentage falls within the established range, provided the candidate is of sound health and standing, and provided the match is confirmed by 3 independent readings, the candidate is to be formally presented to the imperial court as a potential consort designate of the Solathi line." She paused. The article was written 312 years ago, after a plague reduced the dynasty to 2 living members. It has never been invoked. How many living members of the dynasty are there now? I asked. She looked at me for a moment. The bioluminescent lines at her temples were definitely brighter than they had been when she entered. Fine silver-white threads running from her hairline to her cheekbones, lit from inside, not reflective, not cosmetic, generated by something living that the room's conditions had brought closer to the surface. "One," she said. "I thought about that." "That would be you," I said. "Yes," she said, "that would be me." I thought about it for another moment. "I see," I said. And then, because I had been standing in a scanner circle for 32 minutes and my feet had registered a quiet protest, and because someone needed to be practical, I said, "Is there somewhere I should sit down, or would you prefer we continue standing?" Another silence. Then the senior technician made a sound and converted it into something else. The supervisor pressed his lips together. The first court official found something very important to study in the middle distance above my head. The Empress looked at me. For the first time since she had entered the chamber, the expression on her face changed in a way I had not anticipated. Not a large change, nothing dramatic, nothing performed. It was the small shift of a face that has been holding a very specific arrangement for a very long time, and has just encountered an arrangement it did not know it was looking for. "There is a room adjacent to this chamber," she said, "if you are willing." "I'm willing," I said. I stepped out of the circle. The adjacent room was small, as rooms attached to processing facilities tend to be functional, spare, 2 chairs and a low table, and a wall panel providing light in a warmer register than the chamber's blue. An anteroom, probably, for exactly this kind of situation. The situation in which a scan produced a result that required a conversation rather than a clearance strip. We sat. The court officials remained in the verification chamber. The supervisor remained at his console. The senior technician, I noticed, was already on her communicator, quietly, with her back to the room, which meant whatever protocols applied to a result of this nature were being initiated, and the people who needed to know were being told. I had no strong feelings about that. Information moves as information moves. The Empress sat across the small table from me. She had the posture of a person who has never in her life been permitted to sit in a way that was not entirely deliberate, spine straight, hands folded. The particular economy of movement that comes from being observed your entire life, and having learned to make every gesture mean exactly what you intend and nothing extra. "I should tell you," she said, "that I did not know about Darren's world." "I didn't know about any of this," I said. "We're even." The corner of her mouth moved. Not a smile exactly. The preparation for one, the structural beginning of it, held just short of completion. "The Solathi lost contact with a colony ship approximately 90 years ago," she said. "It was carrying a branch of the consort line, not the primary line, a secondary branch, one the records were not particularly careful about because the primary line was stable and the secondary was considered supplementary. The ship was bound for a system near what is now Darren's world." A pause. "When the colony collapsed, the records that went with it included the passenger manifest of that ship. We did not know what had happened to them. The dynasty consort line was declared closed." "My grandmother," I said. "A descendant, almost certainly," she said. "The marker is dormant in you, recessive, entirely unexpressed in your phenotype. You have no Solathi characteristics. You would not have known. Your grandmother's mother likely did not know either, by the time of her generation." "No," I said, "I wouldn't have." Outside the door, muffled but audible, the verification chamber's ambient level was rising. More voices. The sound of a system being woken past its routine function, not alarmed exactly, but activated. "I want to be straightforward with you," the Empress said. She said it with the quality of someone who has decided directness is the most respectful option available and has made the decision cleanly, without revisiting it. I do not intend to invoke Article 14 in the manner it was originally designed. The provision was written in crisis, by people who had very few options and were doing their best with what they had. I have more options. All right, I said. What I do intend, she said, is to ensure that the dynasty marker is registered, that the lineage is formally acknowledged, that the branch that was lost is on the record no longer lost. She looked at me steadily. What you do with that acknowledgement is a matter entirely for you. I will not compel anything. I would not know how to compel a person who stood the way you stood in that circle. I understand, I said. Do you have questions? I thought about it seriously, the way she seemed to expect it to be taken seriously, not as a courtesy question but as an actual invitation. I thought about the scanner and the 3 results and the number 94.9 and my grandmother's incomplete record and the colony that had collapsed 80 years ago and the ship that had been lost 90 years before that. I thought about the particular shape of an old equation that has been waiting for its variables to arrive and is entirely indifferent to whether the variables knew they were variables. I have a question, I said, but it might be an impolite one. Ask it. Why did you come down here yourself? She looked at me for a moment. The supervisor called upstairs when the first result came in, she said. He was following protocol. Anomalous results in the biometric intake are reported to the relevant party's diplomatic attaché. My attaché told me. She paused. I came because in a room like this one, receiving information like this, with people who did not fully understand what they were looking at, I did not want you to be alone in it. I thought about that. 19 years, 43 installations, the processing queues and the clearance strips and the field hospitals and the decommissioning work and the rotating duty rosters and the particular smell of recycled air and machine oil, and a life measured out in 40-second increments. That was considerate of you, I said. It was the minimum, she said. Something in the way she said it made me actually look at her. Not the assessment look, not the inventory, but the kind of looking you do when you have stopped gathering information and started simply registering what is in front of you without any particular purpose except seeing it. She was tired, not sleepy, tired in the deeper register, the way people are tired who have been responsible for something enormous for a long time without sufficient company. The composure was real, not performed, but underneath it there was the quality of something that has been asked to hold its shape under sustained pressure, and has done so and will continue to do so because there is no alternative, and has made a complete peace with that being the condition of its existence. I recognized it. I had worn it in varying degrees for most of my adult life, and I recognized it in someone else the way you recognize a particular kind of weather, not by analyzing it, but by knowing it in your body before your mind has named it. Can I ask you something? I said. You may, she said. How long have you been the only one? A pause, longer than the others. 11 years, she said. My mother died when I was 24. The last of the recognized consort line died 3 years later. There have been candidates since tested, confirmed at lower percentages, offered under various political arrangements. She paused. The highest previous match was 61%. The candidate was otherwise unsuitable. 61, I said. Yes. I was 94.9 across 3 readings. Yes, she said, you were. We sat with that for a moment. I'm a sergeant, I said, military liaison. I was assigned to this summit on a rotation. I'm not a diplomat, not a political figure. I have no assets, no standing in any court, no title, and I am, to my knowledge, entirely human, phenotypically and in every respect that is visible. Yes, she said. I'm also aware, I said, that what you've told me suggests my grandmother's family spent 3 generations integrated into a human colony, without anyone knowing they were anything else, which means whatever the Solathi secondary line looked like, they were human enough to have done that without anyone noticing. The secondary consort line was selected historically for adaptability, she said. It is part of why they were supplementary. They were chosen and sent to places where the primary line could not go, environments where the primary line's characteristics would have been a disadvantage. Your grandmother's mother was likely entirely unaware of what she carried. By the third generation, the marker would have seemed like nothing at all, a dormant thing. A quiet inheritance with no visible expression. She made very good bread, I said. The Empress looked at me. I had not intended to say that. It arrived of its own accord, the way things do when a conversation has moved past its formal register into something more personal, when the guard that both parties have been maintaining, independently and without discussing it, has relaxed slightly on both sides simultaneously, and the first true thing the mind produces simply comes out. I did not try to take it back. Taking things back is generally a poor policy. What you have said is said. Taking it back only doubles its presence in the room. My grandmother, I said, made very good bread. I used to help her when I was young. She had a particular way of folding the dough, 3 folds in a specific sequence, always the same. She said her mother had taught her, and her mother's mother before that. She said it was the right way. She never said where the right way had come from. I thought about my grandmother's hands. She had been a small woman, compact and efficient, with the kind of competence that never announced itself because it did not need to. Her kitchen had always been warmer than the rest of the house. She had made the bread on the 3rd day of every week, in the morning, before the day had gotten busy, and the smell of it was one of the earliest things I remembered, bread, and the specific warmth of that kitchen and her hands folding the dough, in the sequence she had been taught by someone who did not know where it had come from. I had not thought about her hands in some years. I thought about them now. The Empress was quiet for a long moment. The Solathi, she said, have a ceremony. It is very old, older than the dynasty, older than the current form of the court. It involves bread. A pause. The folding technique is specific to it. It is passed through the maternal line. It is not written down anywhere. I looked at her. She looked at me. Outside, the sounds continued to build. Someone would knock soon. The process had been set in motion, and processes, once set in motion, do not wait patiently. I want to tell you, I said, that I am not going to make any decisions about any of this today. I have been standing in a scanner circle for the better part of an hour, and I have received a significant amount of information in a short period, and I would like time to think before I respond to any of it formally. Of course, she said. Nothing I've said today should be construed as agreement to anything or rejection of anything. It is simply what I said. Understood. And I want to tell you, I said, that the way you handled this room, the way you came down yourself, the way you ran the 3rd scan, the way you made sure I had information before anyone decided anything on my behalf, I noticed that. I want you to know I noticed it. She was quiet for a moment. The bioluminescent lines at her temples were steady now in the anteroom's warmer light, a different quality than they had carried under the chamber's blue, softer and more constant, a fact of her the way the gold of her eyes was a fact of her. Thank you, she said, for remaining still. That's what I'm trained for, I said. I don't think so, she said. I have seen people trained for it. They hold still the way someone holds a position, with effort, with cost, with the particular tension of a thing being maintained. What you did was different. You were still the way something is still when it simply has no reason to move. I thought about that. There was nothing to run from, I said finally. She looked at me for a long moment. The kind of look that is not appraising, that is not assessing, that is simply the look of someone choosing to see something completely. Then she said a word. 2 syllables, and stressed. the same one she had used earlier to give the supervisor permission to speak. I had registered it then as a word in a language I did not speak, nothing more. I registered it now because she said it differently, not as permission, not as instruction, not as the word of a sovereign to a subordinate. She said it the way you say a word that you have been keeping carefully in your mouth for a long time, and have finally found the moment and the person to give it to. I did not know what it meant. I would learn later, some weeks after, from a Solathi linguistic record that the court provided as part of the formal documentation process, that it was a word used for a specific and irreplaceable thing, that the standard translation the court offered was this, the returning piece, the part of a whole that was lost and has come back, not a new addition, not a replacement. The piece that was always part of the whole that traveled far and was missing for a long time, and has simply, after great patience on both sides, found its way home. I did not know that yet. I only knew the way she said it. And I knew enough, from 19 years of reading rooms and people, and the particular information carried in the quality of a silence, to understand that whatever the word meant, it was not small. I nodded. I did not say anything. I did not know the right thing to say, and I had learned early and thoroughly that when you do not know the right thing to say, the honest thing is to say nothing, to simply be present with the thing that has been said and let it be what it is, and not diminish it by reaching for a response that isn't ready yet. She seemed to understand. She had the quality, which I was beginning to recognize as characteristic of her, of a person who does not require things to be filled in when empty is appropriate. We sat in the small room for a few more minutes, the two of us, while the process of the universe assembled itself on the other side of the door. When the knock came, 2 knocks, politely, exactly as requested, she said something in Solathi and the door did not open. The knock came again. In a moment, she said in Standard. The door did not open. She looked at the table between us, then she looked up. I should tell you one more thing, she said. Go ahead, I said. The summit continues for 11 more days. The schedule is fixed. 11 planetary governors have arranged their calendars around it and would be significantly inconvenienced by any change. And inconveniencing 11 planetary governors simultaneously is a particular kind of problem I have managed to avoid for 4 years and intend to continue avoiding. She paused. But after the summit, if you are willing to meet with the court formally, not to agree to anything, only to meet, only to be present so that both parties can begin to understand what this is, I would ask you to consider it. I'll consider it, I said. That is all I am asking. I know, I said. She stood, I stood. The height difference was not significant. She was taller, but not dramatically so, and she did not use the height the way I had seen some of the taller species use it in diplomatic settings, as a physical fact to communicate. She simply occupied it, the way she occupied everything, with the particular self-evidence of a person who has long since made peace with being seen and has nothing to perform. Sergeant Marath, she said. Yes, ma'am. She held out her hand. It was not a Solathi gesture. The pre-summit briefing had covered Solathi formal greetings, and none of them were physical. They involved a specific positioning of the hands held at chest height, fingers aligned, a gesture of presented openness rather than contact. What she offered was a human gesture, chosen deliberately, from a language she had learned somewhere other than a cultural brief. She offered it with the directness of something considered and decided. I took it. Her hand was cool and very steady. My name is Varen, she said. Davin, I said. She nodded once. Then she walked to the door and opened it herself, before whoever was behind it could knock a 3rd time, and went back through the verification chamber where the court officials and the supervisor and the 2 technicians and 3 other people I did not recognize were waiting. The sound of the room reorganizing itself around her returned as she passed through it, the particular quality of organized attention that a space produces when it has been waiting for the person it is organized around to return to it. I stood in the anteroom for a moment longer. Then I picked up my clearance strip. The senior technician had, at some point, set it on the table beside the chairs, which I found I was grateful for, and I folded it once and put it in my breast pocket and walked out. 11 more days, then a meeting. Not a decision, not an agreement, not a commitment to anything except being present, just a meeting. The next correct move in a situation that had exceeded every parameter I had prepared for and was asking me, with the particular patience of large things, to simply take one step at a time. I was good at taking one step at a time. It was, perhaps, the only thing I had ever been reliably good at. Not the dramatic step, not the decisive step, not the step that reveals everything at once, just the next one. The one that is directly in front of you when you stop looking at all the steps you cannot yet see. 19 years of training had given me many things. Among them, a precise sense of what a next step looks like. How to identify the one correct move in a situation that has moved so far outside its parameters that no briefing has prepared you for it, and you are operating entirely on the basis of what you know about yourself and what you have observed about the situation in front of you. The next step was 11 days. I walked back through the verification chamber, past the scanner circle, and the 8 panels dimmed back to standby blue, past the supervisor who watched me pass with the expression of a man who has processed something impossible and arrived at a functional relationship with it, which is, I thought, about the best you can do with something impossible in the short term. Past the senior technician who did not look up, because she was on her communicator again, and the system she was running had more immediate demands on her attention than I did. Through the far door into the holding corridor, where the recycled air hit me and the machinal smell of a functioning military installation settled back around me like something familiar, and the overhead lights were the ordinary white of a corridor that had never been built to measure anything. Corporal Enshi was standing at the corridor's turn, holding 2 cups of gray institutional tea, the kind that every military installation in every system produces in exactly the same color and approximately the same temperature. She held one out to me with the ease of someone who has been waiting a comfortable amount of time and has spent it productively. "Took you long enough," she said. "There was a delay," I said. She looked at me with the particular expression of someone who has been given no information and suspects that the information she has not been given is interesting. "Are you all right?" she asked. I thought about 94.9. 3 readings. A ship lost 90 years ago, and a colony collapsed 80 years ago, and a grandmother who folded bread a specific way and called it the right way without knowing where the right way had come from. A small room. A woman who had been alone with something enormous for 11 years, and a word she had said in a way that did not require translation to be understood. "Yes," I said, "I'm all right." I took the tea. Gray, institutional, approximately the right temperature, which is to say, not quite right, but close enough that you drink it anyway, because you are cold and it is warm, and those are the terms available to you. I drank it. 11 days. Then I would go to the meeting.